Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. Today, I have with me, for a special kind of video, a discussion piece, if you would, my good friend and resident Destiny lore bear, Beard Grizzly. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing alright. How about yourself, man?
I didn't expect you to ask that.
Oh. All this... Wait a minute. Wait, hang on a second. Hold up. All these interviews you keep doing, people ask you questions. You go ahead and put them on banner for all these different things. I just got done watching the one where it was you and the person, now I can't remember his name, doing the Warframe voice lines back and forth. And yet that is what throws you off. Well, I'll always remember that from this day forward. It's always the little things, everybody. You can interpret that how you will.
Let's just say it's complicated. I'm like a woman on her period. Now. Oh, that's gonna ruffle some feathers. I didn't
know it was gonna be that kind of discussion today. Okay.
Oh, well, don't get me wrong. Things are going to get heated, what we're going to talk about. Should I just break out the noose now and get it over with?
I didn't think you were going to be indoctrinating me into the counter harem or whatever at this point. I am very confused as to what we're even here for now at this point.
Video games! We are here for video games! We are here for video games, to talk about video games. We're here to talk about that thing about gaming nowadays that pisses everyone off. Live services. Mm-hmm. Oh boy, oh dear, oh my. So, Beard, in your opinion, from your perspective, what is a live service video game? How do you quantify and qualify that?
Well, to be fair, and I think it's, of course, something that is said on this channel fairly often, and of course, I will still say several others besides, that's a nuanced discussion, I think, that needs to be had. However, if I need to break it down in its basest terms, I would say that a live service game is anything that has either a constant online connection or at least allows for, like, constant updates and events, especially with stuff that is, like, given to you and taken away from you as well. They may or may not have stuff like loot boxes. They may or may not have stuff like DLC. Most times they may have one or the other. Sometimes they like to double dip or make things a little bit more presentable for how that double dipping works. Some will do it from like how you end up playing or what you end up doing if you grind out stuff. Where Warframe, I think, is a fair example of that, where you can absolutely grind for everything. So something like the Warframe Prime Vault and stuff like that, of course, too, where you have the elements where you can grind for it heavily. You don't get everything out of the Prime Vault, of course, so that's where the paid element still comes in. I get that they have to get something back off of it, etc., so on. But that's what I think overall, like, the live service idea might be. Another couple of small instances for that, of course, would be pretty well almost any mobile game that's out there, especially if it has an energy or live system, you know, Candy Crush, Final Fantasy, whatever it might be. All of these are live service titles that effectively have something behind them that is either constantly updated and given to you, but then parts of that end up getting taken away. I think that, to me, at its basis, is where live services come in.
Interesting. I always see live services as, well, kind of two things combined. One, consistent updates and patches, like additional content releases after launch. Right. That's a mainstay for live services with me. Like, I think live services, continuous support over a long period of time, not just a one and done deal, and of course, monetization. Like with a live service, it's almost guaranteed to have some form of monetization. Mm-hmm. Usually it's microtransactions, and those microtransactions take different forms. But the unique thing to me about live services is that we only just started calling video games live services, I think around would 2016 be fair? Would 2016 be a fair year where the live service phrase was coined, or maybe a bit earlier?
I think it was before that, because Destiny just had its 5-year today, actually, funny enough.
Coincidental. How coincidental.
Yeah, really. I think it was actually about when the, at least I would kind of figure when the PS4, Xbox One were kind of released, is I think when a lot of those titles started to become more of commonplace ideal. I think they still existed previously, however, which I think I'll get into a little bit later on. But I think when the turn of the generation happened, I think that's when it largely had also happened.
Okay, fair. It's just for me, personally. I didn't hear the phrase, I didn't hear the term until around 2016. When I heard live service getting thrown around. Like, it's true that Destiny kind of, like, in a way, kick-started this for, like, the AAA devs, but
sure.
I'm sure as you want to get on later on, I'm sorry to kind of spoil what I'm sure you were leading into, but MMOs, massive multiplayer games, were kind of the progenitors of this live service model. Basically, what developers and publishers have done is that they've taken the MMO format of, like, continuous monetization and player retention and just applying it to their games.
Right, and it's... all it is an evolution in all sorts and sense of the word, really, where we instead had a subscription fee that everybody had to pay previously. Now it's to the point of, well, we'll have the option for people to do so, and we have to see if that option, of course, outweighs where our server costs are and stuff of that nature besides. And of course, those things have to be levied out and thought of when it comes to live service as well, mostly because they have to have a consistent online element, and if those servers are down, you no longer have that element to make the players that are there either feed into the system or otherwise, for a really ugly way at least to put it, to support what it is that they're playing, I guess is the nicest way to, of course, put it as well. And in that respect, I think that's where... again, from the MMO portion as well, they also started to double dip just as much. I look at World of Warcraft, I think it's still one of the best examples because, of course, it really was the daddy of the MMO and a lot of rights for like making them more popular, not necessarily the first or anything like that. But from the subscription base, they ended up building off of there, and they had the mounts and everything that you can buy. They started doing cross-promotion with some of their other games that they have, and it just kind of fed off and built up from there. But again, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with live services. There's nothing new or creative or special about them. It's just that they have kind of become more commonplace now that we're starting to see games also evolve in that same kind of fashion.
Speaking of games evolving in that fashion, another kind of, I guess you'd call genre of game that's starting to apply the live service model to itself are single-player games. Yeah. Like, there's more and more live service single-player games, and it surprises me. Because you'd think, like, live service, it's prime for multiplayer. You'd think that this is made for multiplayer, but developers and publishers are actually making single-player live service games. Like, Rage 2 is currently like an attempt at a live service. It has microtransactions, you can buy weapon skins, it's having free content updates and paid-for DLC expansions. We have Ubisoft with basically all their recent single-player games, like with Assassin's Creed, Origins, and Odyssey, technically, in a sense, live services, even though they're single-player only games. Like, I'm sure we'll see many more into the future. Like, even Devil May Cry 5. Even though it's technically not a live service, it has live service elements, such as, of course, a premium, not premium currency specifically, but you can purchase the in-game currency with real-world money. There's daily login rewards, and it's Devil May Cry 5, mind you. This is Devil May Cry. Like, a lot of people, like, Devil May Cry is a great game, mind you, but a lot of the things people hate about live services are in that game, and you don't see them get brought up. It's really interesting. It's really interesting, like, how some games are pseudo-live services. They're not technically live services, but in a way they kind of are. It's really weird. Like, I can understand why developers and publishers want to utilize this model. Player retention, guaranteed more revenue. Like, as much as people complain about this on the internet, like, it is proven to generate, well, a massive amounts of profit. Like,
Well,
it's not just free to play, pay to play, whether it's Call of Duty or Fortnite or League of Legends or any other of these games that just, like, they don't, like, sequels... Sequels are in a weird spot because now it's almost more profitable to, like, not make a sequel to your game, but just keep adding on to that base game. It's so... Oh, man, your thoughts, like, because, again, this is such a oddly complicated topic. People try to overly simplify this and just say, oh, live service bad, live service sucks. Well, it's more than that. Like, you cannot like them. I can understand not liking live services, but this is an insidious and complicated creature.
Yeah, well, and I think that, I think I'll be going back to Destiny a lot, because if any of you know who I am to some degree, covering Destiny lore to a rather large degree as well, that's one thing that I think at least I will kind of reference back to Destiny more because that's what I'm most comfortable with. And of course I know that other people will do the same for other games that they are also more comfortable with. But I will also say it for titles like Monster Hunter, where I grew up with that game, realistically. I started playing it in the early aughts, and I keep basically playing it into today. Here's a staggering number, though, for you. 26 million. Can you guess what that number comes back to? That is how much money Nintendo has made on Pokemon Masters since its release worldwide. That game is now 2 weeks old.
Jesus.
Now that pales in comparison to some of the others that are out there, but that is definitely where the idea of like loot box mechanics and stuff like that start to become like a large talking point. And I understand why, because with that 26 million, it's not that you necessarily have people getting everything out of the game at that point. Even if they've spent $300 or $400 into the system, they're not guaranteed to get everything. And that's where the slight, I wouldn't even say slight, because it really is, the insidious nature of stuff like loot boxes kind of comes into it. That's always been why I've been a fan of, and it's funny you bring up Devil May Cry, because I like them as a good example too. But Devil May Cry, from I think Devil May Cry 3 and 4, or at least for 4, sorry, they had their DLC that they had released for DMC4 off the PlayStation 3 and 4, especially when they released the redux of it, and then the original, I guess it was months later. But they were, you pay one time, you get the thing, you're done. And that's where the live service model has kind of sort of changed and upped the ante, if you will, just with their paid models as well. I think that's the biggest thing that I know many have problems with besides. Problem is we do keep paying into these systems, and that's why I wanted to bring up Pokemon Masters and its 26 million, because that's proof positive. People pay into these systems, and that's why people continue to make these games, or why companies continue to make these games. And I think I want to stress before I get too far, that's where you have to also vote with your wallet, but it's not even just necessarily you. it's a larger degree of people that are out there besides that you and I and others just never touch, because they're the people that might get into playing the game for either a little while or forever, and they never watch a YouTube video about what they're actually getting into or what they're buying and so on. They're just enjoying themselves. They're just having a good time, right? That's where
exactly.
you might find with even like movies or books and all of that. So I tend to, if it's not obvious from some of the stuff I've said here so far, I tend to be very focused more on things like the philosophy behind things like loot boxes or the things like DLC behind video games in general, because I've been playing for as long as I have been. You know, I'm a little over 30 years old at this point. I'm very exposed to this medium. And at this point, that's where I think that we can all say times have changed on that one. So I hope I didn't get too far off your point, but I feel like that was something that needed to at least be said as well. Like we keep seeing all of these games that keep popping up, and though we're really kind of like, I don't want to do this again, there's other reasons behind that as well. That comes back to something that you had posted, I guess it was yesterday. There are too many damn video games.
Exactly.
And there really are. I have to basically set myself into knowing what games I want to buy as, one, a content creator, which to the side kind of presents its own special sort of medium for like what you're trying to do. But as a secondary also comes down to like how different it is for what I'm trying to do for the audience that I have or for the people that I'm trying to reach. So my views don't necessarily follow in the whole of what another person's may be. They could be seeing it from the outside looking in. They could be looking at it as somebody that's been a big fan of the series for years, and suddenly things change and everybody's losing their minds, or at least they think so. So that's where other pieces sort of fall into it as well. I'll take a couple examples. Like this year, I'm basically set to buying a few titles. One will be Shadowkeep for Destiny 2, and getting all of its expansions and so on laid out for the year as they pop up, because I know I'm going to invest a lot of time into that, because that's the whole thing with live services. They're investments. They're not just monetary investments, but they are definitely time investments. How much time you want to put in can vary based on the person you are. So time is a very important thing on any of these games, realistically, because time is another factor, not just monetary factor, that you have to consider when it comes to a live service. And I get for many people that tends to also be a problem, because you want to play with your buddies, you want to be able to play with other friends that are like halfway across the country. But if they're not interested in a game you're in, and you know that it's going to take you 400 hours to clear this next title that you're working on, that puts a very big barrier between you and your buddy on what you can end up doing next. Or all of a sudden you go back to the old title that you were on, and it doesn't feel the same because you're not playing something new or next, and so on. But I know that can also vary between people as well, and that's another nuanced discussion behind it all.
Exactly. It's not so black and white. I wouldn't say it's all bad. It's all bad. Like, it's definitely, it has so many, irritating little niggling elements to it when it comes to live services and just how lengthy and expensive these games can be, but there are some games that just greatly benefit from the live service model. Like you said, Destiny. Like, Destiny has gone through this kind of rebirth multiple times just because of its live service nature, because it was able to take community feedback, and the devs took that community feedback and worked that into the game. Same thing with something like Rainbow Six Siege, which has now become one of the most popular games in the world. Right. If it wasn't for its live service nature, Ubisoft wouldn't be able to build this juggernaut that is Siege now. And like Warframe, of course, I've got to mention Warframe free-to-play. So many free-to-play games that because they're live services, they've been able to grow and become these incredible experiences. League of Legends is still one of the most popular games in the world. That game, what, a decade?
Has that game been out for a bloody decade? Yeah, it's been, I think, about 10 years at this. If it's not a decade, it's coming close to it. Because that was basically out when I think a little after I started working like full-time and whatnot at a college and everything. That sounds about right. Oh my goodness. That game has been around for so long. Because between that and I guess it was World of Warcraft, it was always people bouncing back and forth between that when I was playing WoW. I think that was when Wrath of the Lich King came out. Man, that's taking me back a little bit.
Oh, I got those nostalgia vibes. I poke those nostalgia bones, eh?
Well, that's easy to do with me. I tend to romanticize things a little bit too much, and if you know anything about romanticization, you tend to get nostalgic very quickly.
Oh yes, do I ever know about that? Oh man, but other games that like have been able to sustain, there are entire companies that have been able to sustain themselves and keep making games despite like failures because of games that they have to fall back on that are financial successes via being live services. Hi-Rez, for example, with Smite and Paladins. Smite is still going, Paladins is still going. Yes, the communities aren't entirely 100% happy with the games, but they keep adding new content, they keep changing things based on community feedback, and people keep coming back. New people people keep coming in, veterans keep returning, and like it's the same thing. Like, these live services, as much as a pain in the ass as it is to like have your gameplay experience somewhat be tampered with and negatively affected by these monetization systems that are constantly prodding you for more money, I get that. I get why people don't like that. I get the irritation behind that. You just want to enjoy the game. You don't want to think about, why grind for this cosmetic when I could just spend money on it? That temptation. People don't like that temptation, that little dangling of the keys or the cherry or the carrot, whatever, in front of your face. Right. Whatever the terminology may be. So I get that.
Carrot on a stick.
I get why people don't like that. I get that. I get that desire for a pure gameplay experience. You buy the game, it's yours, you own it, nothing else to worry about. I get that. I totally get that, but again, with live services, it's been able to produce some good quality products, memorable experiences, and just like great games to play with friends. Games that you can keep coming back to. Like, I can keep coming back to Destiny and Warframe and, oh man, a game like Payday 2, that game, like, it had so much DLC and free content over the years that people are still playing and talking about and still beloved, like, as much as I'm sure people are hoping for Payday 3, like, just to this day, even though games, like, they reach their life cycle, like, hey, no more content, because they were live services, they've had so much added onto them that years after the whole, like, perhaps content drought or perhaps, like, bare bones launch, years later, now it's a fantastic product to purchase with so much value and so much content, hundreds of hours to dig into. I'm sure it's like that with the original Destiny, with Destiny 1. Oh, it's like that with Borderlands 2, like with Payday I mentioned earlier. Like, if you haven't played Warframe yet, if you play Warframe now with all of its recent updates, you're going to be blown away. I recently got a couple new people introduced into Warframe, and they're blown away at the amount of content in the game and all the stuff you can see and do. It's, yeah, so again, live services, they have their benefits. I will still argue that live services have their place. I don't like how almost every game is trying to adopt the model. I think there's room for variety. How they're trying to make everything so samey and, I guess, repetitive in a sense. Because, like, if you want to do a live service, okay, change it up a bit. Yes, give us the free content updates and the paid-for DLC, but do we have to have the loot boxes? Do we have to have the paid-for cosmetics? What about something like getting the community more involved? Like, players submitted shit, like something like what other games done. Like, I know games like Killing Floor have done this, Payday have done this, Warframe does this, where players can submit their own creations, cosmetic creations, they submit it, and they get voted on, and eventually get voted into the game, stuff like that. That's a great aspect of live services that I wish was expanded upon, like user-generated content that's officially integrated into the game. That's awesome, that's great, and that's something that can only be done through a live service.
Yeah. And largely, it's the only thing that can be kind of developed from a live service, or at least in a timely manner. And that's the other point that I think you brought up a little bit there, or at least skimmed over. The idea of content droughts, that entire thought process has changed from where it used to be.
Oh, I am sure. I'm sure about that.
Compared to, like, something like Call of Duty. Call of Duty is like a really weird one because they had a new one, of course, that they release, and they still release pretty well every single year. Assassin's Creed kind of had the same thing going there for a while, where they were also releasing the same game almost every year with different story and everything. Part of that came down to studio growth, though, as well, because most of these studios have also blown up in size to like 150 or so people, if not more. And most of them are also dealing with some different things. A lot of times, outside of like indie and small development studios, of course, most of the AAA industry is out there doing a lot of these things that are like 150 people, if not more. Bungie themselves, I think, is actually about in the same vicinity of that. And that's just counting the development team. That's not necessarily looking at things like community managers or marketers. That's not looking at people that are doing casting calls or anything like that. That may not even be including the musician work and everything that's behind it as well. A lot of times these development studios, from most reports at least that I have read over the years, have largely just been the development in-house. So whatever that could end up including, I don't know, but largely a lot of firms do things for outside voice work. They don't really get a lot of people for like in-house for that. Same also with musician or musical works as well. They usually hire, if not a symphony, then they get some extra people to go ahead and do that, and then they link up on thoughts and like how they can manage it all. But that can, of course, still depend on the studio, and it depends on the sounds and the voice work and so on that they're looking for. Content drought itself is also different from where it used to be, because I would go... I should almost just look it up, but I'm just going to go off the top of my head here. Going back to Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry 1, I believe, came out about 2003, 2004. If not a little bit sooner than that, if memory serves. Devil May Cry 2 had like a couple year difference between it, I think. That was where they really started to work on the engine pretty heavily. Devil May Cry 3, they took a lot longer time on. I think that was about 3 or 4 years besides itself before they released that. This is also saying this was on the PlayStation 2, which had like one of the longest lifespans of all time out of almost all consoles. But that also should say how our differences in gaming and development have been, because most of these systems have been lasting a lot shorter from where they tended to be or have been over time as well. As consumers, we've been asking more and more out of them. As consumers, we have also been asking a ton more out of the content that they produce and get to us. We're also looking for it in a timely manner. And all of these things are okay to ask for, but they do require funds, they do require people. And that's not to necessarily shill for, who is developing or what's developing for this game, that game, or the next game. Everything still has to be within reason, and the development studio is just as much at fault for not setting those standards correctly to either investors or to the consumer. So there's also those things that have to be kind of thought of and so on besides. But content, I keep getting railed on this a little bit, but content drought is very different, because now I go 6 months or less in Destiny and I have a new season to play. I have something different that I can end up doing, or a different activity, or I have some different lore to unlock, or different places that I can end up going for a small portion at least, because I know they're not developing full worlds like they were with with Mars, where they went back to Mars and Warmind, for instance. They haven't really done too much of that outside of Forsaken proper. But I look at something like Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World did largely the same thing. Unless it was their large, big DLC that they just came out with Iceborne, the same thing still applied. And that game has a history of that. They'll possibly redo some old maps that they had from older Monster Hunter titles, but they would incorporate them into the game and barely do a lot of work onto them. You could tell, just like Pokemon does, it's the same engine. They're just smart about how they put it together and utilize it. So if it's not something that can be easily put together and so on, the content drought is going to happen. Development times are going to happen. And I think that that's a very important thing to keep in mind as we kind of go forward with even talking about this, is the idea of content droughts have changed over time and changed over course within a very short period of time.
Keep in mind, this whole content drought situation, this whole content drought terminology, I didn't really hear much of it until the rise of the live service. Because now there's an expectation. Okay, we're playing these games for lengthy amounts of time, we're replaying content over and over again, we're participating in the monetization systems and the business practices, we expect content quickly in a timely manner. And I find that fascinating. I don't entirely agree or disagree with it. I can understand, hey, you're giving the devs money, you're putting in all this time, you want more. I get that. I can kind of get that. But I kind of, I have to side with more of the developers here, where content takes time. It can be genuinely hard to make. Highly depends, of course, on the graphics engine and creating new assets, the money involved, and the deal with the publisher, how much the publisher is willing to invest and how much time they're willing to allow the developers to develop new content.
Which voice actors available, which musicians are available, which anything is available, largely. That's the whole thing behind all of this, is how many different components go into it and what we kind of expect of that full experience. Like, all of that is very important to keep in mind. And largely, I think the content drought thing, I should say this before I keep interrupting you here, that's largely something that's of the MMO culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that MMO players knew about for a very long time and kind of got used to, because we would go like a year at points and we wouldn't have any actual updates. That would be a massive content drought that we would have to fight. You don't necessarily, or you wouldn't have necessarily seen that in gaming outside of that, unless it was like a continuous supported shooter, maybe like some of the old Battlefields and whatnot. Even then, though, we had more openings, and I think this is where we can kind of talk about this a little bit, perhaps at one point or another. That's where the mod community has also kind of gotten the shaft a bit here.
Oh.
Because with the rise of live services, you also have to kind of consistently think about where your copyrights are or anything like that, along with other pieces that I would love to bring up. I know we tried before with the archiving as well. So there's like all these different aspects of live services that come into it from the from the copyright angle just as much, and that also becomes a big placated problem that I think we're starting to see amongst gaming in general.
Man, like on one hand, I'm happy that with the live service model, developers and publishers, like, it's much easier to protect their IP, to protect their products. Like, it's like, I can understand why some people pirate, why they need to pirate, depending on your living situation and whatnot. But, like, there are some people who pirate just because they're lazy fucks that don't want to cough up the money. So, like, there's malicious people like that, and I'm glad that thanks to live service, like, it encourages people to buy the game and not pirate the game, because you can't really pirate a game that's always online and connected to servers and whatnot. So I'm happy that developers and some publishers, not all of them, keep in mind, have that extra layer of protection with a live service. Because I want game developers to be successful. I want them to be financially successful and protected. On the other hand, like you brought up with modders, the community, the gaming community side of things, in a lot of ways, they get fucked hard. Particularly with modding, because, well, you can't really mod an always online game without it be considered hacking, and you getting banned from the game. And modding is such a beautiful part of gaming, that community-generated content, and it's a shame that we don't see... a lot of AAA games now don't have mods. They don't allow for mod support, and it's a crying shame. There are some exceptions, and they are wonderful, wonderful exceptions. I'm happy they exist. One of them being a game we keep bringing up, Monster Hunter World. Like, Monster Hunter World, like, it's a perfect example of a live service that's consumer-friendly. Like, it has other monetization systems like purchasable cosmetics and whatnot, its expansions, all that jazz. But still, once you buy that game, it's yours. You own it, you can mod it, you can hack it, you can alter it however you want, you can play it offline, duplicate save files, all this shit. And it's still a live service. You're still getting content updates and whatnot. It's very impressive that Capcom has taken that pro-consumer route with Monster Hunter World. It's very admirable.
What's that? Hang on, hold up. Did you just say you could be pro-consumer with a live service?
Yeah, you can! Like, I would even argue that some Ubisoft live services are pro-consumer. Yes, they have their flaws. I'm not going to deny that Rainbow Six Siege and For Honor have their flaws, but for the most part, they're pretty damn good games right now. I can easily recommend both those games. They're jam-packed with content. The developers, like, I know there are some members of their respective communities that don't agree with every decision the developers make, but they are still taking feedback and implementing things based on community feedback. It may not be everything wants, but it still happens. Right. And of course, like, there's Warframe with their whole Tennogen system and player-generated content. I know there's some controversy recently with Killing Floor 2, but I would still argue that Killing Floor 2, up until a certain point, most recently, I know it's debatable, that it was a decent live service. Payday 2, again, like, I know there was the whole Vault situation, but still, we still got a pretty good game in the end, thanks to its live service nature. I gotta mention, I haven't played this game yet, but again, I've heard nothing but good things about it from the community and how it's grown and improved and become a really great game. Ghost Recon Wildlands, that was also a live service. Like, there's so many examples I have of games that are good because they were a live service. because they took the community feedback, because they added all that free content, and the monetization was able to enable them to keep supporting the game years after launch. Like, ugh. But monetization is man, again, the other gamers getting the short end of the stick here, like, with the decrease in modding, the kind of fall of modding, almost, if you will. I know, a bit overdramatic, but still. But we got... fuck. I don't want to talk about this because it's a circular argument. We know where this leads to. We know the arguments you and I are both going to make, but I guess for the sake of just getting it out of the way, monetization. We got to talk about monetization, and...
We have to. Like, there's no way to not talk about a live service in one way and not talk about monetization, which is either fortunate or unfortunate, because at least it's kind of like, you know, it's a constant within that side of gaming, if you will, but it's also unfortunate because it's a constant in that side of gaming. Because there's so there's the other spectrum. Like, I think you and me focus so much on certain titles because it's what we're more exposed to.
Indeed.
And I would definitely say that, like, for you and me both, on my kind of poking and prodding of telling you to do it, we both like Monster Hunter. We both like Destiny. I think we largely both like a lot of what Ubisoft has that is put out there as well. I think that there's plenty of games that are out there that you and I kind of get into because they're like the fantasy side of it more than anything, I think, too. Exactly. That we tend to forget about one of the biggest ones that's out there, and I was reminded of this as I was going through my my recommended on YouTube.
Oh yes, I know where this is going.
I saw this guy called Angry Joe, and if there's like 2 videos a year that I like to listen to him on, it's his rants on NBA 2K and Madden. And, you know, there's also the others that are out there like FIFA and so on. Let's be blunt here. The sports gamers get screwed.
Oh, yes. I feel sorry for them. Like, you can't just play and enjoy the game. Like, right. There's ads everywhere. You can't make any progress without basically spending money or just waste your life away grinding meager currency. Oh, Lord.
Yep. I gotta say, grinding and getting a loot box in Overwatch after an hour's worth of play is nothing compared to the crap you have to do in a lot of the sports titles, which is saying something. So for anybody that I think that has like a soapbox to stand on and talk about absolute malicious practices, that's it. And I don't think anybody within, at least between the two of us, would end up saying like that's a big no way. Like they're totally fair about everything that they do.
Oh fuck no.
For how much money EA has gone on record for the slight bit of changes that they showed that they take into like FIFA, for instance. Off FIFA's contract alone, they ended up making $800 million.
Jesus fucking
Christ. So
Christ.
For me, I'm looking back on that going $800 million. Let's do a really quick stint of math here, shall we? And if anybody wants to get out your calculator, you can go ahead and do this with me.
Already on it.
Just type in 800 million and then divide that by 60. What does that equate out to? 13.3 million copies of the game that they would end up selling is what they ended up getting back from FIFA on for the rights on everything. That's not saying what they made from the game. That was saying what FIFA gave them back on for it. So to tell me that they have to put those malicious practices in is absolutely staggering. So with that out of the way, and getting that crap out of there, because I think that is absolutely malicious behavior besides, let me go to the other side of it, which is the arguable piece on this one, and I know it always will be. Let me talk about Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Destiny has since broken off and broken away from Activision. What we have yet to see at this point, and of course I'm wary but optimistic on the wary optimism, obviously, which is where that two words end up mixing. With them being split off from Activision, we have to see what they decide to do. We have to see what they were in charge of, or what they were basically responsible for over the last several years of the games being in development. I think so far, with some of the communication they've shown off, I think that they've been very much a different company. And overall, we can kind of figure that when all's said and done, Activision probably had a lot of things at play that they were necessarily doing to Bungie to say, no, do it this way, or don't do it at all, or why aren't you putting in this monetization practice, etc. And it's not to say that Bungie isn't doing that again, but they're doing it in a semi-favorable manner, and they're also at least kind of coming out and telling us about what things funded, or what we funded in order to receive back into the game itself. So one thing that Luke Smith highlighted, the director for Destiny 2, was that there was a mission that was produced called Zero Hour. The entire thing was basically crowdfunded in a lot of rights. From start to end, from the item you pick up, from having the inclusions placed out throughout the world, and then getting into the mission, and seeing an actual model of Mithrax and whatnot, a little bit more detailed from where he was previously, and not just like a standard fallen captain that we had seen. And these were things that kind of changed up from where we had seen it previously for that character alone. And then we ended up getting into the mission itself for 0 Hour, and we got the reward, which was Outbreak Perfected. That entire mission was effectively crowdfunded. Us returning to the tower, us going into the basement and going through all of that was thanks to the monetization practices that they had in place. So there was a point where they had mentioned, yes, that we have an operating cost. We have to make sure that we get back the funds that we have for what we have with the game as a whole. But we also understand that we can't take all of this cash and put it towards a third yacht or something like that, like some of these guys like to do. We have to put it back into the title itself. And that's where this whole, even on a creator level, on like a YouTube creator level, the idea of crowdfunding kind of becomes another conversation all in all. If somebody ends up taking, let's take for instance like a Patreon or something like that, and they go ahead and they take the cash and they're just like, well, hey, thanks for the cash, thanks for supporting the channel. I'm not going to listen to a thing that you have to tell me, though, and I'm not going to make any changes at all, but I'm really appreciative of the fact that you support the channel. If they continue to support the channel, they're not technically in the wrong for any of that, and they're still supporting a creator and a channel that they definitely believe in. But let's take, for instance, that content creator decides, I'm going to take $60 from this Patreon fund, and I'm going to throw it over to this game because 6 or 7 people have started to really say that they're interested in it, and a lot of other people are starting to kind of build off of that interest as well. So maybe I should think to go ahead and pay a little bit for that. Well, that's a bit of crowdfunding at that point. The same general instance ends up becoming no different than what happens with a video game company, especially a publisher or developer that stands on their own, like Bungie. And that's where the other side of this comes in as well. There are the developers that are out there, like D3 and whatnot for Warframe. They're creating their title on their own. They're self-publishing and developing. That's very important for them to make sure that they have a revenue stream coming in. But then, and this is why I wanted to highlight the guys at the front of it too with EA, where they had those extra revenue streams coming in of $800 million from FIFA because they have the rights on FIFA. That's where red flags start popping up about the cash. And that's where you have to start wondering where the investor expectations are, where the consumer expectations are, where the developer expectations are. Because I'm not even going into the fact that over the course of time, from the people that I've talked to with those sports titles as well, have also seen a lot of features and game modes taken away from the title. And this was no different from what happened with stuff like Battlefront 2 when that was released as well. And now is in a better position than it was previously.
Oh, yes, yes.
But it also didn't have the funds that was being given to it because they shut most of that off for at least a fair early bit of the game as well. So that's where the idea of publisher and developer needs to always be, I think, understood as well. That's why I'm okay with supporting a company like Bungie, because they're very much on their own. And they haven't shown that they're being published by anybody else. Do they have partnerships with others? Yes. Are there a couple questionable ones with, like, Tencent? Yeah, still wondering what's going on with that, for sure. But these are the things that I think ultimately have allowed them to grow their title up as well. And that's where the benefits of some of this crowdfunding have kind of come in. You get a little something back off of it, like a cosmetic you're looking for or something otherwise. And that's, to me, where it kind of should stay. I don't think that, like, pay for power should ever be in there. Maybe battle passes are an argumentative piece. I don't know how I feel about those realistically. I haven't really experienced one, so that's why I don't really comment on too much of it. But that's where I think that we're kind of at with that. Like, the difference between how monetization is handled is very much a moral, an ethical piece of it as well, just as much as it is an operating cost and an expansion of content cost to either us or them, or what they decide to go ahead and use that cash on. So I think that's where all of it still needs to be weighed, and by end of day, it's all about balance. That's really what it comes down to. Do you need a third yacht? Do you need it? Do you need a third yacht?
I don't know, man. It's very tempting. It's that time of the year. You never know.
I mean, I guess hurricane season's right here, so yeah, why not? Well, and this comes back to vernacular in terms of, like, companies that I decide to support.
It's all contextual. It all depends on context. Absolutely. I don't like. Excuse me, incoming gaming community rant. I hate the hyperbole and the generalization and the broad strokes. Granted, Excuse me while I am a complete hypocrite and say you should expect corporate greed. I'm sorry. I know that's hypocritical of me to say. But again, context matters, but also, to be realistic, you should expect corporate greed. I don't understand the moral outrage. This has always been the case. It's always going to be the case. I'm sorry.
I mean, unless society decides that they want to go ahead and rise up against the corporations and start overthrowing them in favor of small mom and pop all over again, that's about the only thing that's going to end up changing that.
Are you talking about revolution, comrade?
I don't know what you're talking about on that one. I mean, that's where, like, I listened to the CEO of 2K, who has definitely come under a lot of fire recently as well. But, like, Take-Two, 2K, and then Rockstar as well. Like, any of those guys, I decide not to give my money to them. I just don't. I'm not thrilled with their business practices. I'm not thrilled with how they decide to talk to us as the consumer. I'm not necessarily even that thrilled with the content that they produce. But that's also my choice. I don't go around on the internet blurting that out. Overall, I decide to go ahead and play other titles that I decide to be interested in. Because, one, I know what I like. Two, I know what I decide to support is going to end up going towards something that I care for overall. And three, by the end of the day, if they're not receiving my funds and they're also not getting the publicity behind it as well, they immediately start going downhill. And as much as I don't want to see people lose their jobs, that also kind of paves into it as well, to say this is what you need in order to bring yourself back up from where you used to be, or get back on, like, a level playing field, or level idea of, like, how you should act as somebody that is, in some rights, serving me as the consumer. And one story about this, which I think is important to go back to, bring up Capcom again. How screwed was Capcom not but, like, 5 years ago? Like, how absolutely and utterly screwed were they? And now I look at them and I'm like, hold up. So you're telling me that Capcom released a Resident Evil title and it was a horror game? You're telling me that they re-released Resident Evil 2 in all of its glory, but they remade the entire thing? Voice acted and all? Are you telling me that they continued to listen to what was going on with the West, and they released Monster Hunter World at the same time to everybody? Is this the same Capcom? Is it the same one that came out with really bad business practices with Street Fighter V, which has now been like pretty well taken care of? Is this the same company that also decided that it was a great idea to put on-disc DLC? Like, are they the same company at all? The answer is no, because they had a wake-up call. And largely, if you feel that there are companies that are out there that deserve the wake-up call, then the best thing to do is always just vote with your wallet with it. But really, the hate and so on isn't going to do anything. If there's like disinterest in what's going on with certain games, then yeah, that's it. My channel right now is completely blown away about the fact that I'm not interested in Borderlands 3 at all. And there are so many people that are looking at me like, why don't you want to get this? I'm like, you're gonna tell me that I'm gonna pick up Borderlands 3 when I already play Destiny and Monster Hunter, largely. My time is already sunk, gone, and I have none of it because I'm a content creator, I have a job, and I've got to play games for other things.
Oh, you think you got it bad? You think you got it fucking bad? Dude, I'm switching between like 12 different live service games at once. Jesus Christ, I have so many progression systems and currencies to keep up with. I've got limited time events and seasons and battle passes. Got all this shit I need to keep up with.
Look, this is what I was just talking about by keeping everything within a level of understanding, all right? You gotta set those expectations for your viewers. That's your fault, man. That's your fault. I'm kidding. Yeah, it's like that's the demands, though, that are placed on I think content creators just as much on that end, though, with like how live services have been as well.
I wouldn't just necessarily say content creators. Like, I get what you're saying.
No, I would say like gamers in general.
Like hardcore gamers in general. Hardcore gamers. Like the casual player. They don't give a shit, and they have no reason to. And I wish I was. You know what? There were days where I wish I was a casual gamer, where I was just totally apathetic. Where I just buy a game, say, hey, it looks cool. I play that, put it down, move on to the next whatever. But no, I gotta care about the stories and the world and like getting all the coolest loot.
Well, right. That's why like I have a problem with like looking at games like Borderlands, because I look back at my viewership and I'm like, I'm disinterested in the characters, except for like Handsome Jack and Butt Stallion, because it's Butt Stallion. Like those are the only two characters I really gave a damn about out of Borderlands 2 at all. And then largely like the same thing sort of fell through with a few other live service titles that were out there, like Rage and Rage 2 I never got into because they didn't necessarily grab me as far as like what my interests were. So when I start to dig into a game, I either am going to respect that the game will give me the time of day or give me what I'm kind of after because I did my research ahead of time, or I know what kind of like stuff I'm getting into. And even then, I have to do the same thing with franchise titles. But I learned this early because of Final Fantasy.
Oh, Lord.
If I could go into that real fast.
Yes.
My first Final Fantasy game, before I started going backwards with a lot of them, was Final Fantasy VII. And I think largely that's what a lot of people were kind of in as well. Final Fantasy VIII came out, and I didn't like it quite as much. And I ended up buying it off of a whim because I was like, well, this would be great. You know, these characters are like the kids of the last ones or something, right? That's how this series works. Like, that was my 10-year-old thinking at that point, 9-year-old thinking, I think, at that point. And I was like, oh man, this is nothing like the last one at all. But it also gave me a deeper appreciation for the games that came previously in the series and for the ones later, until Final Fantasy XIII, which we don't talk about that abysmal piece of crap. And I know that's a divisive conversation.
You didn't
that
like
I just
Lightning
started
Returns.
In the conversation.
You didn't like Lightning Returns and her like modeling and all her clothesline and all that stuff. Wasn't that great marketing for a game?
Like,
because everyone cares about Lightning and her pink hair.
Well, Lightning is a very popular character in Japan.
Hentai,
so that
you mean?
I will at least say. Japan. As far as sales went, like Final Fantasy 13 outsold over in Japan versus what it was over here. To put that as the first Final Fantasy game ever pretty well on Xbox was a big mistake. Let's just get that one out there right now. But then again, like Final Fantasy 15 sort of like made me relive some old moments behind everything as well. And I was apprehensive about that one after what 13 kind of was. Anyway, whole point is, as I kind of drag this out a little bit more, titles themselves require a lot more research, I think, on our part, because we have so much more information that's given to us. And if something is not told to us as consumers as time goes by with game development, then that starts to be more red flags for me on game companies and publishers as time goes by. That's what largely led to me saying I'm gonna like stop supporting 2K or Gearbox and a couple others that are out there for games like Borderlands and so on. And ultimately, that was their choice. That was their decision to go ahead and either hype up a product that doesn't fit the bill or narrative that they've been trying to shill off the whole time, or it's their overall decision to not be truthful with me as the consumer. And so far, I think most of the games that I support overall have done still a fair job of doing that. I will always say that there's going to be those marketing tactics that get involved, and it is very important for anybody that's out there within anything that, if you buy anything, period, if you buy anything outside of groceries, you need to go ahead and research what sales tactics are, because that is primarily what you hear when you're at stuff like E3, and it carries over as time goes by. And you can immediately tell who's passionate about what they're actually doing and who isn't very quickly.
It's very interesting that you bring up sales tactics, because sales overall, like when we buy a product, we are expecting to get our money's worth, right? And that includes somewhat of ownership of the title, ownership of the product. So I'm just curious, because with the live service model, the always online nature of it, and sometimes the multiplayer only nature, sometimes the like always need to be connected to the internet, this game like only exists because it's connected to the internet, archival of games, like historic preservations of games, are becoming all the more difficult. Sure, these games are selling gangbusters. Sure, these games are making the sales, but they won't make sales forever. Eventually, they'll be nullified, void, unobtainable, and I hate to think about that, and I'm hoping that several of these live service titles that I play and enjoy like won't meet that fate, but it's a grim reality and possibility.
Yeah, it's funny you went that direction from what I was just talking about, because that was exactly what I kind of meant by it too. There is this question when all is stated and all done, what happens with these titles after their live service idea or their servers get shut down? I will constantly go back to the debacle that was Battlefront 2, Star Wars Battlefront 2, after Pandemic was shut down as a studio. And then in addition, what the Supreme Court of the United States also ruled on it, which basically said that even though the game itself is shut down, to recreate the servers for archival reasons in any way is not allowed due to copyright on this level, and this level, and I forget the actual statutes, unfortunately, at this point. But there were several reasons as to basically why they had it that way. And largely, I think it came back as well to, ownership, and this sort of goes back to like mods and everything as well. Ownership on who actually has rights on the publication. You may own the game, you may own bits and pieces, if you will, out of it. You may pay for pieces out of it, but you largely own that title. And that's where the dilemma on live service games, of course, really comes into it. Because again, after the servers get shut down, what happens to them? Well, Supreme Court, again, has said that that's not in any way an option. That's not in any way something that you can do for even archival reasons. So that means that games that are, and we'll stick with Destiny here again, that have that always online component are largely basically sunk. Like I'm playing this game knowing that largely they're going to run into the problem of saying, well, we're not supporting the game anymore, so at this point we're just going to shut down the servers. And it was fun while it lasted for the last 10 or 12 or whatever years that we had it going on for, and that's it. Like, that's where it could potentially lead. I still think that it's going to come down to like what Bungie decides to do on that one, of course. And I don't think that they kind of fit in that same bill. But again, we were talking about operating costs. Servers are operating cost. And at some point, the company themselves are not going to be able to continue that operating cost. So unless somebody else wants to pick up the operating costs for the servers, then of course we're not going to necessarily see those games stay in motion or keep up with anything, etc. The game's going to get shut down. And we won't be able to really reference the game, play the game, and so on. And this is where I think another piece of the dilemma kind of comes into everything as well. I think games that are built on the idea of having a single-player component are going to exist with their discs and so on. And if they want to have the single-player component, they will implement that. They will have it. And that's where I think Monster Hunter World is, again, a perfect example of this. They have the offline single-player element, which is great for somebody like me who's more of like a solo hunter. I generally like to see how far into the challenge I can get without any extra help. And some people will end up being the opposite and be like, I just want to blow everything up and run through it as quick as I can with my friends. And that's the choice that you can make with that game. But that's ultimately what it comes down to. A choice. Destiny has plenty of components that could be played as single player. They chose not to build that element in. They chose to have it be always online. And that's where I think there are other games that kind of fit that exact same bill. You can have, I think Assassin's Creed has their offline elements still as well. So even 20 years down the line, if you've got a PlayStation 4 or 5 or whatever that keeps supporting this architecture and coding, if they continue to have that offline element or had an offline element, you could play the game no problem.
This is why I don't understand. This is something I never understand, like from a businessman point of view, from a developer and publisher point of view, why you wouldn't have an offline component to your game. Because then you're still...
Or a bot mechanic,
yeah,
too,
like in multiplayer and PvP, like even if servers shut down, like, hey, at least you have offline with bots, because when you have an offline component, when you have a single-player component, you can sell your product for eternity. That's the beautiful thing about video games, is that you can still make money from games years after release. My God, fucking, like, Jesus. Minecraft, people are still buying, like, Unreal Tournament and the old Quake games. Like, it is still making profit of Doom. People are... Doom! The 1990s Doom. Classic Doom. People are still buying Doom to this day.
It just came out on the frickin' Switch.
Exactly!
Like, yes, for God's sake, you can absolutely do so. And it's... All it comes down to, of course, is it still takes a team to alter the code and so on, but it's a lot easier to take that code for those older titles, if you will, and put those single-player pieces back onto a system later on than it is for all the jury rigging and so on that you would need in order to have these server-only titles exist on other platforms, or even later down the line have the same thing also be in there too. Again, Capcom's a fair example of this because they keep releasing most of the older Mega Man games as well. As I think I had showed you a couple days ago.
Yeah.
They have Mega Man ZX and ZX Advent along with the Zero titles coming up. And they just got done doing that for like the Mega Man Legacy collections for Mega Man and then also for the X series. But those titles are constantly rebranded and rebuilt for what the newer systems are like. And I see no problem with doing that. That's also generally a sign of the times and a sign of like how we're digesting, I think, our games besides, which could be a completely different argument or talking point on all of this, sure. But I generally agree with you where I'm like, I don't know why more companies don't at least have the single player element or have a single player version so you can catch up on it all. How easy would it be? On a tangential note for this, you've never played Destiny 1.
Exactly.
If they had Destiny 1 in most of its flair on a single-player version, and they released it on Steam for $30 or something like that.
Fuck, they would make a fortune. They would make a fucking
here's
fortune.
the single-player experience. Here's the story of the first one. That would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it has the elements there. It's semi-open world. There's that appeal to it. There's all the different like horde mode-esque type modes for like, oh my god, like, it's all there. It's right there. For fuck's sakes. And you'd think that Bungie would have learned from Halo. People are still buying and playing Halo. I'm looking forward to Halo coming to Steam because the fucking campaigns.
I mean, I finally get to finish the fight and also play Halo Reach. And
yes!
Eventually see freaking ODST and whatnot besides. Like, those are titles I didn't get a chance to play, and I would love to. Mostly because I didn't own an Xbox for the longest time. But that's my biggest complaint. If anything, as somebody that also like looks into history besides, they keep repeating history, and it's all the wrong stuff.
Oh man. But that's what happens when you have these game companies that aren't run by gamers.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where I was bringing up with Capcom and 2K and so on. Like, as much as I don't want to see people lose their jobs, as much as I think that's terrible to think about overall, when all is said and done, what would happen if EA, Activision Blizzard, 2K and so on ended up getting the crap kicked out of them out of so many years back to back, and suddenly they pulled a Capcom? Because I can't see that as a bad thing. I can't see what Ubisoft has been doing recently, going, wow, we really sucked for a couple years there, maybe we should turn things around, as being a bad thing. Because that shows overall where they're in touch with their consumer base, which is largely, of course, still what we are, and versus the ones that aren't in touch with their consumer base. And all of it, I think, comes down to like how they decide to do their marketing besides. Like, I know this is slightly like off point on like where the live service model is, but when you're largely dealing with these companies on the regular, when you play your games, you still have to consider what they decide to do as a whole, as a company. And that's why I think that this is partially bad for the gaming industry at large, or the gaming community, not necessarily industry, but the community. Because we start thinking about these politics and inner things that happen behind the scenes, but we don't necessarily know what's going on with it because we're not experts. And we shouldn't be purporting ourselves as experts. And nobody that is on the internet on a YouTube channel should say that they're an expert on it, because they're not, unless I actually see credentials behind it. That's where the things are going to start to change out. Otherwise, you are just as much as a mouthpiece on the TV. You're an opinionated person just as much as I am.
The whole elitism, the moral grandstanding, like, it's not helping. It's not helping. Vote with your wallet and have debate. Have discussion. Get out of the echo chambers. I'm sick and tired of the whole live service bad, get rid of it. Like, no. Yeah. No, we wouldn't have games like Monster Hunter World. We wouldn't have games like Warframe if it wasn't for them. So let's have a more nuanced conversation about this, eh? Like, to finish off this conversation, this video.
I was going to say, we could be here for another 5 hours.
Oh, God, yes,
frankly. But that's how nuanced all of this is.
Exactly.
Really.
Exactly. But let's end this something with a tad bit controversial. Beard, in your opinion, could you, depending on the game and how it was made, could you be excited for a live service, or be excited hearing that a game you're excited for is going to be a live service?
Let's think of something on that end. I got 2 examples that I just kind of brainstormed here. Let's consider that Yoko Taro comes out tomorrow, and he says the next Nier game is going to be a live service, multiplayer game that would follow the same general path as what happened with something like Project Yorha, or something similar. Suddenly, all of that is not necessarily just like an online thing where you're picking up stamps from dead people's souls like Dark Souls. Now you have a more community-driven element to like fight off some of the monsters that you're also fighting. I think that could have potential to be interesting. Do I think it would necessarily go well? And depending on how it goes, I don't think so. But you know, that's at least something that I could be like partially interested in that I could look at and go, well, that has some unique potential if they decide to run with it properly. They could do like a prequel where it's the lead up to how Yorha was put together or something like that, for instance. Have that Hawaiian mission that A2 was on, for instance, and be able to capitalize on some of like the story pieces that have been listed behind those and kind of make a more grand scale. I'd like that. I think that there is potential reason for something like that. And then I'll go with another one that is possibly more of a live service game that's coming up, again from Capcom here, I think. They just came out with a, what is it, Project...
Resistance, Project Resistance.
Resistance, that's what I wanted to say, I wasn't sure if it was. Yeah, Project Resistance looks very similar to what Resident Evil Outbreak may be. And if they can build that into something a little bit more as well, to be a constantly online narrative and so on, there's a reason I would be okay with that. And that's because the original two really were not that bad off the PlayStation 2. And in addition, if you don't know the small history with it, Monster Hunter came out of a competition with Capcom between 3 studios to create multiplayer games. Monster Hunter ultimately won. They still took the Resident Evil Outbreak thing and ran with it a little bit. It wasn't as successful as what Monster Hunter turned out to be. And then I think the other one was like an RC Pro-Am game that they had that was online. I can't remember exactly. But if they're in this mindset right now that Capcom is in, I'd be very interested to see what they end up doing that if they do make it a live service title. And we don't have long to wait because Tokyo Game Show is going to be showing that game off anyway, which is really interesting. Anyway, short answer to your question, yes, I think so. There are plenty of games out there that I would love to support after the fact, but I'm also somebody that's understanding and knowledgeable of the fact, and I think companies have to be too. I am a human being with finite resources of funds and time, and the largest one being time. And this was something I was talking about earlier on besides, and I'll close out with this. I've set myself to like 4 games, I think, this season, largely. I usually pick up Pokemon whenever they come out. I probably won't be this time because I don't think I'm going to have the time for it. As much as I absolutely love Pokemon. I'm down to really like Doom Eternal. Link's Awakening when that comes out later this month, actually. Shadowkeep and like all of its stuff that it's out there for. And I picked up Iceborne. And I think largely that like those 4 games are going to be my major ones that I decide to put my time into. Which sucks. Because there's other games that are out there like Astral Chain that just came out. I would love to pick up play and get into that a little bit more because I love Platinum games. But I have finite resources on time. And I as a human being need to understand that that time restraint exists. And unfortunately, I don't have all the time in the world.
Couldn't have put it better myself. As for me, when it comes to live services, I'm not gonna lie, people. I'm not gonna lie. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I've grown accustomed to them. I understand that's not what a lot of you want to hear, but I've had more positive experiences with live service video games than I have had negative experiences. The reason for that is, well, I'm sure Beard can attest to this, doing your research. Knowing what you're getting into. There's a reason I don't buy Call of Duty anymore. I don't agree with its live service model. There's a reason I don't buy sports games, because I don't agree with their live service models. But I'm willing to play like upcoming games like Gears of War 5, Gears 5, that's going to be a live service, that's going to have future content. I understand the Master Chief Collection is going to have live service elements, I'm still excited for that. Borderlands Free is apparently taking a wee bit of a live service angle with how they handle future content past launch. And of course, my most anticipated video game of all time, Doom Eternal, it's been semi-confirmed that there's going to be free and paid-for content after launch, kinda like a live service, and the game is gonna have cosmetics for its multiplayer battle mode and different skins for the Slayer, some of which might be purchasable cosmetics, so Doom Eternal may be a live service, and I'm okay with that. Because I know people don't like when... I know there's a great deal of gamers that don't like when people say this. But games are expensive to make nowadays. I know there's this whole argument going on, games are less expensive to make. No, they're more expensive to make. You don't understand. These fucking graphics engines, they're so intensive and time consuming. And like the sound effects, the voice acting, it's so much fucking money. So yes, while the publishers are greedy and they take more money than they need, it doesn't take away from the fact that these games are expensive. And live services help compensate for those absurd expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know a lot of you don't want to hear that, but that is the case. And here's the thing, I want these big games. And if the only way for these big games to keep being made, these big blockbuster games with beautiful visuals, these cinematic cutscenes, I want more games like that. If the only way for those games to continue and be financially viable is to have these live service monetization business models, I'm alright with that. It all depends on the context of how they handle monetization. That's a big thing with me. It all depends on how the monetization is handled.
Right. Well, and I think one thing too to kind of point out as well, Nintendo has largely been the company that I've looked at over the years, especially I think since the Switch kind of came out as well, has been the company that has always kind of like relied on fun. And I think that this is all opinion based right here, but I think that they get that word more than most other companies do. When even they are in all of their pushbacks that they've been doing with titles or delayed release dates that they've been doing with titles, they push back Metroid, they push back Animal Crossing, and they were going to release a new Zelda here this year. They decided not to. But even then, that new Zelda title that they're working on, it's going to be using the same engine that Breath of the Wild did. When those innovators themselves are even saying, we've got something here that we can keep going with, I think that even says it all too.
I couldn't agree more, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for joining me for this lengthy conversation on video game live services, Beard Grizzly. If more people want to hear your lovely, lovely voice and hear you talk about Destiny and perhaps other games in the future, where they go to find you?
You can actually find me over on my YouTube channel. You could just look it up, Beard_Grizzly. And that's pretty well everywhere as well. I have a Twitch. I haven't Twitched in like 2 years or something though, so I wouldn't really bother with that. I have a Twitter. We've also got a community Discord, so you can find all those places there. But yeah, right now I'm in the process of reading the original Destiny Grimoire. So even if even if you played Destiny or never did, you can at least experience a fair bit of like the backstory and some of the monologues that are there from the Grimoire. And if not, I've been told it's really easy to sleep to, so there's always that.
Not going to shout out your Pornhub account.
I didn't know I had one. I think you're talking to the wrong people here, Tron.
Maybe I am. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, share the video. You know the gist by now. See you all later.
Bye.